Hello, welcome to week 7. Wow, this is your last full week in this course and the last video lecture actually. So um, I'll miss talking with you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to kick off these important topics each week. I hope you've found the video lectures helpful. Maybe at times mildly entertaining. I don't know. That's probably a lot to ask. But here we are. I mentioned last week that you are smack dab in the middle of my wheelhouse, and this is where I live. Narrative I see the world through a narrative lens. I was not originally trained as a narrative therapist. I was trained in more classic psychodynamic training with a little bit of introduction to these newer constructionist theories that were just emerging. Narrative wasn't even being mentioned when I was trained, but solution-oriented had was coming into vogue, and I discovered narrative probably about 6 or 7 years into practice, and just fell in love with it and became obsessed with it, to be honest with you. And I have I live here, and it's hard for me to not see people and families and situations through anything other than a narrative lens at this point, which I have to keep in mind, because there are certainly circumstances and situations where other therapies are probably clinically indicated, and I want to make sure I offer people the best options. So occasionally I will still, when I'm working with somebody with significant, serious, horrific trauma, rape survivor, for example, worked with a while ago, that was not benefiting from these constructionist perspectives. Then I went back to my old standby. I was trained in prolonged exposure therapy, and it works. And I will still pull that out of the backpack on occasion. But for 8 out of 10 people that I see with trauma, I'm working through a narrative perspective with them. So I hope you find this interesting. I hope your interest and curiosity gets piqued enough that you decide you might want to continue and grow and learn more about it. So we'll get a chance to spend some time in the narrative world this week. I've mentioned social constructionism, which is essentially a rejection of earlier beliefs that there's one fixed objective truth. Instead, the thought is people together relationally and in their environment construct realities as we live them. And therapists who are viewing things through this kind of a lens focus more on meaning and shared sets of assumptions and premises than we do on specific behaviors or people's well, let's leave it at that, because it gets a little bit complicated. But we're going to encourage people to examine the stories that they have lived by, search together with the therapist and other important people in their lives for a new, more empowering version of that story. And language is incredibly important in narrative. We really spend a lot of time paying attention to the language that the client's using, the language we're using, the words. This is down to each word that we use, and the meaning that's assigned to how we interpret and describe the major events in our lives, the shaping events. And this invites people to discover new meaning and to take back authorship of their story and restory what has previously been a troubling and distressing perspective. So narrative, it is about story. It isn't just about talking about it, though. That's where it gets again, like solution-oriented, it often gets misunderstood. And a lot of people who do talk therapy of one form or another think they're doing narrative, and they're certainly, most of the time, they're not. And it's a belief that our lives are really a series of sort of chapters in this ever-changing story. And some of these chapters are loving and affirming, hopefully, for most people. Some people, sadly, have yet to even discover, one sort of loving, affirming chapter, and we hope that can come. Other chapters, for most of us, are harsher, less forgiving. Some are outright harmful. And this happens to us slowly over years. We often don't recognize it. Sometimes it can be a single event that is life-changing and really just completely takes over our story. So one of the challenges that narrative recognized and deals with, as does solution-oriented in much the same way, is that it recognizes that for whatever reason, call it our humanity, and it's just part of being human, but we live in this problem-saturated society, and we tend to internalize this. We tend to be more glass half empty than half full, and it affects us, right? You turn on the news, you flip on, you look at Twitter, what do you see? It's rare that you see some wonderful thing. You see this problem stuff, this negative stuff. Narrative offers us a new perspective. It offers hope and healing by inviting us to reclaim our stories, to take back that what I call authorship, and recognizing that our stories they're forever changing. We're not locked. This isn't one book. This isn't the Brothers Grimm fairy tales where the fable, Hansel and Gretel has happened and we can never change it. We can change the outcome. We can change the way our story builds and where it goes. And one of the things that narrative puts a lot of emphasis on is separating us from our problems. It's the term that's used is externalization. You'll work with that this week. And in separating and sort of externalizing, and naming, we begin that process of renegotiating our relationship with the things that have been giving us trouble. And the thing that's so wonderful about that, in my experience working with folks, is as long as we think this stuff's inside us, then we view in some way, at some level, we view ourselves as flawed or broken. And the best we can do is sort of, manage this flaw. Where narrative says, no, not buying into that. You are not a flawed, permanently flawed, broken human being. This stuff does not live inside you. Get it out here. Get this stuff out here so you can change your relationship with it, right? So this externalizing helps us to realize that we are not our problem. We're not the problem. The problem is the problem. A couple of quick examples. My depression, for example, I come and see you and I say, well, my depression's just consuming me. I've had it. I can't remember when I wasn't depressed. Instead, I'm going to help you to shift that language from my depression to the depression. And then eventually find and personalize that. What is the depression for you? How does the depression look and feel to you? I've often had people describe it as a dark cloud, a menacing sort of force of some kind, right? And my panic attacks, right? My anxiety might become the panic or the scary monster, for example. It's whatever the person comes up with, by the way. Please don't name things for people. It's such an important part of this process that they find the name that has meaning for them. And sometimes it stays the depression. That's okay. Most frequently, I'll say people do customize that, and we help them to really thicken. It's called thickening in narrative, to thicken that story. So, I invite you to try that. Just take a moment and try that. Say it right now to yourself, or say it out loud. My depression. Again. My depression. Now, reframe that and say, the depression. Do you feel that shift, that little shift? When it's not mine anymore, right? It's an amazing thing. And when you're in session with somebody and they have that moment, you'll see it. They feel it, you'll feel it, and it's one of the things that I'll tell you, it brings me back to narrative time and again because it is so cool and so amazing. So changing this language that we use helps separate us from our problems, as we've said. So you might see something like, I'm so depressed I can't get out of bed, and that becomes, sometimes the depression is so strong it won't let me leave my bed, right? In this case, the therapist might model this first. My anxiety gets worse after dark. And I might respond, the anxiety, it has more power over you after dark, right? I'm addicted to meth. I have to smoke to feel alive. Might become, sometimes the craving becomes so strong, it steals your ability to feel alive, right? Once we separate, the beauty of that is, then people can do something about it. As long as I feel like this thing's inside me, like I said before, it's really difficult to do a lot with it. But we can change our relationship once it's outside. One of the things we do in narrative is called exploring the effects of the problem, the operations of the problem. You'll see it in narrative in your textbook or narrative in narrative language. Example. How have the habits affected your relationship with your teacher? This is, these are examples of exploring the effects. How has the depression affected how you think about yourself? I'm curious, how have the hostile voices affected your energy levels? Is it easier or harder to do things when they are dominant? Tell me, how has the bulimia affected your moods and feelings? Right? These are exploring the effects. We're not judging. We're not providing answers. Right? Narrative therapists are the most curious people you'll ever find. We live in a world of curiousness. We are so curious to find out how you perceive your world, which is what makes it so client-centered. It really is, for me, the most profound example of putting the client in the center of their therapy, making them the expert of all the approaches we use. Much like solution, we're looking for exceptions, unique outcomes. How have you managed to stop the problem from getting worse? Are there times when it's not as bad as usual? When it's less dominating, less bossy, doesn't take over your life as much? Can you think of a time when the problem stopped you or got in the way? It could have stopped you and got in the way, but it didn't. Oh, you thought one. Well, tell me what happened. What was happening then? Right? Very cool stuff. Narrative, there's a process in narrative called migrations of identity. I don't know that you'll get in that too deeply in this course. If you took the narrative, if you took a narrative class at some point, you would. But it's looking at our lives as a journey, a migration of identity, and we actually, in narrative, we gradually, people, they reclaim that migration, and often they change how they experience and how they interpret it, which is, again, where some of the healing and some of the change comes in. This all results in reauthoring or reclaiming one's story and beginning to live our preferred story instead of that problem-saturated story that we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. Narrative, I find, is extremely sensitive to trauma and culture. It doesn't require people to relive trauma, but it deals directly with trauma. It's an incredibly hopeful, healing, and empowering perspective from my experience, and I really invite you to enjoy exploring it this week as you learn more about this and dig more deeply into the specific interventions, strategies, and approaches used and apply them to practice. So thank you. Thank you for taking this journey and following these lectures, and I'm sure your instructors are helping you do the same in the course, and it's been a pleasure. I wish you the very best. Take care.